Welcome to the monthly recording of Talking About Kids that's held in conjunction with the Arizona Alliance for Adolescent Health. With us, as always, is Vinny Chilani and Tracy Pedrati. And our guest today is Corinna Jenkins Tucker. Corinna is the director of the Sibling Aggression and Abuse Research and Advocacy Initiative, or SAARA. We say SAARA. SAARA, in the Crimes Against Children Research Center at the University of New Hampshire. And we are very excited to hear what she has to say about this topic. As always, if you have a question, please let us know in the Q&A section here, and we will try to address it over the course of the podcast. But Corinna, what got you started? What started your interest in this topic? Because it's pretty specific.
Yeah, sure. Since graduate school, I've always done research on sibling relationships. At that time, I was mostly interested in sibling support and pro-social behaviors. And I eventually became interested in conflict. And then David Finkelhor and I were in a meeting and for something else. And he approached me and said, I'm having students in my classes ask me about their sibling relationships and what's going on and the aggression that's being shown. And, would you like to work together? He is the first and only person who's collected national level data in the US on this topic. And I guess you could say the rest is history. And we've done a lot of work together on this topic.
And you and your colleagues describe sibling aggression and abuse as invisible. Tell me a little bit about why you use that adjective.
Yeah, there's minimal public recognition of sibling aggression and abuse. It's often equated to rivalry, which people,
Mm,
the norm is that's not harmful. If you have a sibling, that's typical. It's temporary, kind of ends at when childhood ends. And in some cases, some parents think it's even beneficial. It kind of makes you tougher, kind of makes you, prepared for when you get out in the real world. And generally, it's viewed as less serious than bullying. Other forms of child maltreatment. We've actually done work where we asked about the same exact behaviors being displayed between siblings and peers were viewed as less serious. So sibling aggression and abuse receives a lot less attention in comparison to other forms of family violence, whether it's intimate partner violence or child maltreatment. But it is a form of family violence, and it is the most common form of family violence there is.
in fact, and tell me if I have this correct, I believe that your study, that your center found that about two-thirds of siblings will experience this in their lifetime or report this. Is that right? No, I'm sorry,
It's
one third. One
yeah,
third. Right.
it's
Two-thirds
it's
haven't,
about
but right.
yeah, it's about one third. Specifically for teens, it's about 30% will experience some form. And when I say some form, it could be psychological, it could be physical. We also include property aggression in there as well. So
Mm,
destroying cherished items or forcibly taking something. So and what's of note for adolescents who do experience this is that the rate of what we call severe victimization, which we define as including a weapon and or an injury, it goes up
mm.
from childhood and adolescence. So it's about 5 to 7% of adolescents will experience a severe form of victimization from their sibling. And in that case, the data was in the last year.
When you talk about sibling violence, uh, how are you defining siblings? We have so many wonderful family structures in our contemporary culture. So, do you define sibling when you're asking these questions, and does it matter?
We have to take a very broad view of siblings when we ask this. It could be, sometimes there's no blood relation. It's
Mm,
someone to be your sibling. So We do take a very broad look. I mean, we have looked at by family structure, but in general, we're talking broadly.
I ask because I suspect that people have had different reactions, and I'm thinking about children who try to reach out to a champion, to a trusted adult when they're experiencing some sort of sibling aggression. I suspect that they have different reactions sometimes from adults, depending on if the aggression is from a step brother or stepsister versus a blood relation. Is that in your research as well, or?
What we find, not that specific, but
Mm,
what we find is that sometimes children, adolescents don't even recognize what's happening because it's not defined as such. It's defined as rivalry, and including adults. They don't necessarily recognize it either, and are inclined to dismiss it, or ignore it, or just say, oh, that's what brothers do. There's ideas of masculinity wrapped into this, and also femininity about what girls do. And so there is a tendency to rebuff this as a normal part of childhood, and it is not. It is not a normal part of childhood, to be harmed by your sibling or to harm your sibling.
right. And let's talk about some of these long-term consequences because to me they do seem to track with what we know about bullying, right? So the kind of some of these long-term consequences seem to be in line with what we see about witnessing or being victim of bullying. So let's talk about a little bit in particular about this norming of interpersonal violence that happens.
So you learn to fight with a quote peer, with your sibling. This is where you learn conflict management, conflict resolution. You learn a lot of important interpersonal skills, including listening, perspective take,
Mm,
negotiating. All those, that's where you learn to do that with a peer. And so there are lifelong effects or implications from how that relationship goes. So we know, and this has been shown across the lifespan, sibling relationships that are characterized as, having a high level of conflict or including aggression, I'll extend even to rivalry, that there are important mental health effects that
mm,
throughout lifespan. So older adults will report feeling more lonely, more depressed, more anxious, when they do not have a positive sibling relationship. We also know that some of these interpersonal skills that I discussed earlier about managing conflict or disagreement, those skills, and whatever you learn follows you to your romantic relationships. And so sibling relationships that where their aggression is displayed, or you're a child who's been harmed by aggression, are
mhm.
more likely to experience dating violence. It's also associated with being bullied by peers. So there are a number of connections with sibling relationships. So on the flip side, those who learn to negotiate, learn to cooperate, learn these important social emotional skills, they tend to be more successful in their peer relationships, their intimate partner relationships, etc.
And does it matter if you're the victim or the perpetrator of the aggression?
In terms of experiences with relationships outside of the family,
Exactly.
yeah, no, there are you know, negative associations for both roles.
Hmm.
Definitely. And some children in their relationships, they will share both roles of being the harmer and the one who's harmed, or they may harm another sibling. So that can happen. One thing I did want to mention too is I don't want to neglect family relationships as well. So, um, you know, Relationships with parents are also affected when this happens. There can be, sometimes parents will join in and create a coalition. They might, join in the abuse in some cases,
Mm.
or so family relationship difficulties, possibly even estrangement, which we do see that in adulthood, can happen as well.
So, Corinna, I'm glad you mentioned that sort of sometimes there can be some collusion with parents and caregivers. Like in my clinical work, I find that sometimes authority is delegated to older siblings to like run the house and be in charge of younger siblings. And that's where I think these dynamics can come into play.
You're absolutely right. There is work showing that older siblings put in a caregiving role, there is a greater risk there for sibling aggression and abuse to take place. For example, an older sibling taking care of some younger siblings after school on a regular basis and such. And thinking about that older sibling may be in the same developmental period or just a couple of years older, and they may not know or have these skills around negotiating disagreement or conflict. And so a lot of times when this aggressive behavior happens, it's because in some cases there's a lack of communication skills, a lack of conflict management skills. And so in our work at SAARA, we promote some of those, working with parents and working with the children themselves to develop these skills, because you can see the sort of the cascading effects of an aggressive sibling relationship and what it means across the lifespan for mental health, what it means across the lifespan for interpersonal relationships. It really is a central relationship in children's lives.
Mm.
A lot of these relationship skills, and well, in my work, I've also shown that it's been linked to physical health as well.
Yeah.
So more aggressive relationships and such are linked with like sleeplessness, nausea, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, trauma, regardless of nature, is trauma, and they
Right.
they operate with the same neurohormonal mechanisms and create the same imprints in our systems.
I completely agree. We at SAARA are advocating for parents, professionals, practitioners to take a broader view of family violence and
Mm.
family trauma, and to screen, to ask about siblings, what is going on there. When exploring what is happening in the home, there is a pretty strong correlation between a family environment where there is aggression or violence and violence taking place between the siblings.
Yeah, it to me it sounds like a complete erosion of one of the like pillars of resilience, right? So if your home unit, which again should be the source, hopefully, of strength that you can take into other environments, when that is no longer safe, at the hands of a sibling, it just seems that it has cascading implications. Uh, I do have a question from an attendee about some effective strategies for addressing this. But before we get to that, we have a lot of practitioners as well as teachers in the audience. What should they be on the lookout for the kids in their classrooms or in their programs? Are there warning signs?
Yeah, so for a child who's been harmed, it may be that they're feeling fearful. And one of our studies, in particular for adolescents who experience severe aggression, 62% of them reported being afraid of their sibling. So being fearful, being anxious, not wanting to maybe go home after school or be alone in the house, or always wanting to be out of the house.
Mm.
They may be overly differential to their sibling as well. So there's, if you're looking for signs, there is overlap for those children who've been maltreated by parents. So, there's overlap between abuse in terms of signs that are displayed. For the child who does harm their sibling, they may be aggressive with others. They may, lack social skills, these interpersonal skills that I talked about. And or in some cases, the children may just not even recognize it. As I said, this is an unrecognized phenomena generally.
Can I
And if I'm
clarify,
not,
Brad?
yeah, thank you, Tracy, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just curious, Corinna, is the distinction between sort of what you mentioned as sort of typical sibling rivalry and that kind of sibling relationship that I know I see in my two young kiddos, is it a frequency of aggression? Is it a level of aggression that really kind of moves it into that stage of being considered abuse?
So we think of we classify that we have like a table that we use. So in terms of when do things cross the line, that's the question a lot of people ask. I'm glad that you asked this, Tracy. It's fabulous. We actually have a bulletin on it at SAARA that you can find on our website. But so for us is the impact that it has on the child who's been harmed. Is there some sort of impact? Typically, it could be an emotional impact, it could be a physical impact. Sometimes, when there is sort of things get out of hand and maybe children or adolescents lack the communication skills, the conflict negotiation, conflict management skills, there may be aggressive behavior that takes place. It's very important for parents to stop it immediately and to work to create a more constructive atmosphere of listening and working together. So we look a lot at impact, and is there an intent to harm? Is there an intent to control? It's difficult to assess someone else's intent. So that's what, we put it in there, like what's the motivation, but really it's about the impact. And with abuse, so there's aggression and then there's abuse. Abuse has its own characteristics of that. It's repetitive, it's enduring, tends to be an imbalance in power between when it's more aggressive behavior, it's usually mutual. And mutual doesn't necessarily mean the same behavior shown, etc. But so there you want to really look at the impact and what it means for those children as individuals, for their relationship, for the family atmosphere. So if there is harm being done, it has to be stopped. There should be a no hitting rule. And often, it's not acceptable between parents and children. It's not acceptable between intimate partners. It's not acceptable between friends. So it should not be acceptable between siblings. There shouldn't be different social norms there.
That's a great segue there, Corinna, because I think you mentioned one of your center's practical tips for caregivers for promoting positive sibling relationships. So what are some of those other tips that you have, not just for caregivers, but these are things that can be used in classrooms and after school programs, in practices?
Yeah, so just broadly at the sort of the societal level, we need to change our norms and our thinking about siblings and get the norms that we have for peers or other family relationships or other intimate partner relationships should be in line with siblings, that it's not okay to hit one another and to harm one another. And it's when we talk about creating a safe, nurturing family environment, that has to include siblings. And professionals and practitioners should be screening for this and figuring out how to respond. And so when working with parents specifically or working with children in the classroom, it is important to teach skills around conflict management and resolution. So if there is a disagreement, to stop with the children, that a lot of times people use mediation techniques, and they are quite successful and actually been shown to have positive causal, I use that word on purpose, effects on kids' social and emotional development. So stopping and saying, okay, there's a fight going on here. What are we fighting about? I'll go through this quickly. And being able to identify what you're fighting about is half the battle. People have different points of view. What are we even fighting about? Once you know, then you can solve it. And so each person can give their point of view, so you have to listen. It's where empathy is built. And then the onus for solving it is put on the two individuals. This can be used in a classroom setting too, not the parent, because a lot of times parents feel like referees and they're in the middle and they force an apology, or they just say, this is what's going to happen. And that builds resentment and anger between the siblings and with the parents. So have the siblings come up with solutions, have them decide what they want to do, and have them enact it. And then to praise them for doing that. Younger children may need some help because they may be developing their logic skills, but parents or a teacher, whoever, a coach, should remain a neutral third party. It's very, very important. It builds trust between the siblings. They learn to rely on one another. And this is your longest relationship likely of your life, and can be such a source of support and emotional support, instrumental support across your life. That as parents, you really want to build that to be as strong as it can be, especially when you get old and they have to figure out how to take care of you. You want them to work.
So, Corinna, I think that approach is really interesting, where you ask parents to be neutral third parties and for young people to resolve it themselves. Because, like in all other instances, my advice to parents is, no, you lay down the line. Like I work in with gender diverse young people, for example, and sometimes gender can be weaponized when siblings argue. Sometimes the sibling will go for the jugular and know where it hurts. And usually, like our guidance is, no, like parents, you lay the line and you set the ground rules. Can you speak to that difference?
Yeah, so parents should set the ground rules in terms of, we're going to listen to one another.
Yeah.
And we're going to generate solutions. And I think going for the jugular, as you say, this is where listening to the other person, the impact that it is having on them, the person who's harming may never realize it, or realize how much it is affecting. A lot of times what parents will do is they'll assess the intent, they'll assess the impact, and that is really very difficult to how often is that correct? And sometimes people can't even assess themselves to know, right? So it's very important, and it really builds that I can trust my sibling, they care about me, and it's been shown to strengthen their relationship and strengthen family relationships as well. And they learn to work together.
Which I think would be so critical for the long term, like you said, because the parents aren't always there to help negotiate that problem. And so they're building that skill to do that without the parents, which I'm sure is beneficial for the relationship.
I mean, you want your children to have their own independent relationship with one another. There are studies that show in later adulthood, when parents pass on, because the relationship was through the parent, the siblings lose touch. You want them to have that relationship with one another through their lives, and it to be a positive one. It is such an important, unique relationship that can be a source of support and strength at any time across the lifespan.
Perhaps related to Vinny's comment earlier, another tip that you have for caregivers is to resist comparing or labeling. I mean, obviously the comparing one, I think I understand, but let's talk about both of those, and in particular that resist the labeling of the siblings.
Yeah, so you siblings, so if you label one as, oh, this is my math kid, this is my sport kid, this is my good kid, who doesn't give me any problems. I mean, siblings, they're natural competitors for families' resources, mom and dad's attention, finances, time, and they're natural competitors, so that comparison starts happening. You want to value each child for who they are and nurture that. And siblings can overlap in their interests. They don't need to be pigeonholed, and those interests may evolve over time and change. And so who you thought was your music child, maybe no longer 2 years later, So I think putting kids into different buckets or, using different labels is not helpful to them. And sometimes those labels can be weaponized. And you want to value each child in the family for who they are and create family time, create opportunities for the two siblings to have their own time and stay out of it. And also to create time between the parent and the child. It's important. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be a big to-do. Parents are busy. They have a lot going on. They may have many children, but even if it's just carving out just a brief interaction, it's can be very powerful.
I think that whenever you're dealing with conflicts that exist in a home, but you're a teacher or you're in a program or you're in a practice, that is a difficult relationship to manage and to talk about. So we've been talking about tips for dealing directly with a sibling or dealing directly with children. What resources does SAARA have for the professionals that want to add, real tools to their tool belt?
Yeah, so SAARA has a website. We're in the process of revamping it. We have a website where we have information. We also put out what we call bulletins on various topics. So we have 9 of them right now. We continue to write. We also have a Psychology Today blog that we put out about every 6 weeks, and it's been highlighted many times as an essential read, and Psychology Today does promote it on all sorts of topics related to siblings, including sibling sexual abuse. We also have peer-reviewed journal articles, scientific articles that we put out as well in a variety of journals, various different disciplines. And we also are available for, trainings. We are very flexible. We can offer 30 minutes, 2 hours. We're doing a half-day session next Tuesday with a group. And we also can tailor it to the audience. So we can show examples of screening questions to use, how to work with parents, and looking for signs and symptoms, anything like that.
I have one other question, and it's from the audience, and it's really topical. And maybe this is something that Vinny and Tracy, I'll ask you to help us work through together. The question is, considering election division within families, what do you think siblings can do about political differences when one sibling's preferences can mean negative impact on the other sibling, especially in the case of gender expansive siblings? So first of all, are you seeing that the atmosphere, the current political atmosphere, is being reflected inside families as well and leading to sibling aggression and abuse? And again, if you have any tips for handling that.
Yeah, sure. So we haven't studied the political climate in relation to families, but what I can tell you is that we know that siblings who are gender expansive are at greater risk for being harmed by a sibling. Studies have a couple, there's not many, they're coming out. One was just recently published that show that they are at greater risk for being harmed by a sibling. Yes, so it's something for parents to monitor, keep an eye out for. And I think this is in one of those cases where I would go back and encourage to learning these communication skills, these social emotional skills of, okay, there's a disagreement about this. And I think giving each sibling a chance to talk, because it might build important empathy there for one another, and greater understanding where each are coming from. They may still walk away with the same points of view, but it may lead to differences in how they care for one another and treat one another going forward, and being more sensitive about it. Because if they can work together, they'll value that sibling. They don't want to lose that sibling.
Vinny, Tracy, do you have other thoughts on this topic?
Brad, I can't necessarily sort of tie it to like the political environment, but what we do recognize is that there's always like we have a long history of gender and sexual stigma, and this gets enacted in the context of relationships. And I definitely hear from young people where, some family members, some siblings are just perfectly loving and welcoming, and then there are those who are just not, or perhaps they may not even have disclosed their identities to on account of perception of how they might respond to it.
Yeah, and also it could be, I'm saying about bringing people together because I'm Miss Susie Sunshine here, but it also could lead to it could lead to estrangement, and that may be the safer choice and the best choice too.
It is worth noting that poll after poll conducted by Reuters and other polling groups across the board find that all Americans believe that our country has become too divisive. So this is something that we can all agree on, and we can begin to model that conflict resolution in our homes, among ourselves, and for our children. Corinna, I want to thank you so much. This always goes by very, very quickly, but there is going to be a link to the Sibling Abuse and Sibling Aggression and Abuse Research and Advocacy Institute, SAARA, at the University of New Hampshire, so that all listeners can go and get additional information. And while I have everybody, I want to take a quick moment to talk about what's happening next on Talking About Kids. We're about to start a 4-part series on eating disorders. That's going to launch a week from Monday. So Monday, if you want to share this podcast with your colleagues, you're able to do that starting this Monday. But then after that, we're going to be doing 4 episodes on eating disorders. And once again, as I am with Corinna, I'm just blown away with the generosity and the expertise of the guests who have agreed to come on Talking About Kids. So we're starting with Brenna Austin of Striped at Harvard University, talking about the prevalence and stigmas associated with eating disorders. It has to be one of the most cited researchers we've ever had on Talking About Kids. So close to 70,000 citations on her work around eating disorder in kids. Jean Doak is the deputy director of the National Center for Excellence for Eating Disorders. Going to be talking about the harm that eating disorders can cause. That's going to be fantastic. We're going to be going upstream after that to talk about healthy living as prevention. We have a guest, Anna Lutz of Sunnyside Up Nutrition, talking about that. And then we're going to wrap it up with our next live recording with the Arizona Alliance for Adolescent Health, where we're going to have Noelle Markham, the population health dietitian at the Arizona Department of Health Services, is going to be live here a month from now to answer your questions and to describe the state and federal resources that are available for parents, teachers, and direct service providers. So I hope you'll all listen to all of that and come prepared in a month with your questions so that you can move the needle on eating disorders, just as I expect you to move the needle on sibling aggression and abuse. So thank you all very much. Stay regulated. Take care of yourselves. Thank you all.
Yeah.